Do a little roadmap what we're covering here. We're going to cover who I am, how we got here, an important thing to think about when doing alternate timelines. Did you say htmx? I did. What are the practical implications of changing history? Let's ignore those, and then we'll talk about the misery and horror we perpetuated on the world, and then we'll go to the hill for Beer.js. So a little bit of housekeeping. The Hypermedia Systems book is both cool to look at and also a good book to read if you have the inclination. It's available as an ebook. I got the physical copy. It's a nice thing to own. And then, I relied on the htmx docs a lot for this talk, and there are a couple other things I'll note in the slides. I don't want to bury you in code tonight because you're all smart folks, and I think that you'd be better served to just go and read the documentation on htmx. I think that it's a useful tool for us to talk about the state of the industry and how did we end up where we are. So we're going to do that. Who am I? Yeah, I'm an htmx CEO. Took a lot of years to get that title. Omaha native, graduated from UNO twice. I just started a few weeks ago at Dev Obsessed, really thrilled about that. I'm a cyclist, slow, and I really like to make espresso at home. You can reach me at either of those locations, but I don't post, so it wouldn't be really worth your time. So here's an abbreviated timeline of the web. The early years are a lot of links, simple documents, simple layouts, links. HTTP 1.0. Basically, the gist here is, every link click gets you one full page reload. Everybody loved that, but we went to JavaScript anyway. The core thing I want to point out here is the REST dissertation, because we'll come back to that, written by a good-looking guy named Roy Fielding. And the same year, we're getting into Ajax. We're going to load bits of data without a full reload. So those two things, I think, are both really important and also extremely timely in 2025 to talk about HTMX. And then, as we get further along, we're going to get into jQuery. We're going to see the rise of REST, which is going to differ a little bit from his vision in his REST dissertation. And then, surely this needs no introduction to this group, but here are some, core dates for the single-page application era, just for our baseline. So, the cost of complexity, you all probably know this too. There are some pretty steep learning curves to get really, really good with some of these tools, and a lot of time and effort has been spent trying to get people up to speed in the JavaScript ecosystem. We have, performance concerns, maintenance concerns. As we move from technology to technology, we're always sort of in flux, deciding what we need to do. And accessibility and SEO have become major talking points in our industry as a result of all the work we've done to enable interactivity. So we have a lot of questions to ask ourselves today. Have we done too much to get too far from what made the original web cool? Was JavaScript a mistake? So consider the lowly hyperlink. What does this link do? Well, first the browser renders NebraskaJS to the screen. And then when you interact with it, it's going to issue a get to NebraskaJS.com, and we're going to load the body of the response into the window replacing the current document. So this is really Web 1.0 stuff. I mean, it explains itself, but it's worth considering for our purposes. I wish that diagram was bigger, but here we are. So that's what it looks like when you load. Your entire screen's been replaced with the content from NebraskaJS.com/about. So there are some limitations here. First of all, without using JavaScript, you can really only use anchor tags and forms to do any navigation on the web. Only click and form submission events will trigger HTTP requests, and really we only work with get and post in those scenarios. And then we can only replace the entire screen. So in theory, HTMX could be extended to allow any element to issue a request to a server, acting as a hypermedia control. Could allow any event to trigger HTTP requests. It could give us access to the other HTTP methods, put, patch, and delete. And it could allow request responses to replace elements within the document rather than the entire page. we've already solved these problems, right? We've done this in React. We do this pretty much every day. Here's a pretty simple implementation of I'm going to get a greeting from the back end and throw it onto the page after I click a button. Most people don't really think about this. This is second nature for all of us here at NebraskaJS. But as a baseline, I coded it up for us. Really exciting stuff. There's our greeting, and we can trivially inspect that we've loaded a greeting here in our network. Wow, there it is. Thrilling stuff. That's the end of the talk. So the core thing here is to interact with this bit of code. We've got a button. The button has an on-click handler that tells React we need to run some code that does some stuff. So this is our little flowchart describing that interaction. So we're going to request a server, get a response with some JSON, and then the browser needs to know what to do to handle that response. I guess consider this. This is a problem you are solving every single time you deploy code. This is not something that the browser does natively. You have to tell the browser how to handle a button click. And when you start to think about that, like the thing that broke my brain, like that's pretty crazy. You're doing that every single time you're deploying JavaScript. So what if we could do this differently? What if we could issue a request to a server from any element and then get a response that we can use to update parts of the current document? So what if we got, as a response from the back end, the entire HTML element that we're going to display there? That's hypermedia. So we're going to get into some definitions here. Hypermedia is a media that includes non-linear branching from one location in the media to another. This is just links. You do this every day. Hypermedia as the engine of application state. I'm told that there is not a pronunciation of this, but we're going to call it hate OS anyway. This is sort of the original vision of the REST dissertation that Roy Fielding wrote. And in this, servers would provide both data and the controls needed to navigate to the related resources. So not just a set of touch points for your application to know what to do, but a full model of information and controls you need to navigate from one screen or one set of information to the next. And the core component of this is that the clients don't really know, they don't need to manage a separate model of state. So we can consider this like, here's a JSON response you might get for a wonderful product page. It has a price. It has whether it's in stock. It has some other links that are related that need to be rendered. But the core component of this is the browser doesn't do anything with it by itself. You have to tell the browser what to do, and that requires having a JavaScript file that maintains its own mental model of the state of the application. And that's cognitively pretty expensive overall. So what if we could just send a hypermedia response that defines all of that for us? So expressed in HTML terms, it tells us the layout, it gives us the next control to add to cart. It might give us an alternate control or other options if the item is out of stock. So in this case, the server has dictated to us, the client, that we have a set of controls, we have a set of things we can do, and we're going to tell you how to lay it out. And your job in the client is to apply styles, make sure it's accessible, and then expose any relevant information to a search engine. So the controls are in the response. All the mechanisms you need to get from the product page to your checkout are included right here. And that's pretty powerful, another thing that broke my brain. So now we're talking about hypermedia a little bit more intuitively. We're talking about embedding controls directly in the content. We're providing both the data and the interaction layers. And now the browser doesn't need to know all the application logic in advance. So the server has defined everything that we're going to be doing in our product page. There are some upsides here. The server is in complete control of the application flow. The things you write and deploy to the browser becomes a lot simpler, and you can manage your interfaces a lot more without having to push a second code base of client code. So that's the philosophical foundation we're going to talk about here with htmx. So now we're ready to talk about htmx. What does htmx stand for? Hyper, text, markup. htmx doesn't stand for anything. The X is, I think, just for fun. But htmx is a library developed as a tool to overlay our new understanding of hypermedia onto the technology we know and love today, which is to say, it's a JavaScript import. There's always a JavaScript component to NebraskaJS. So some geek facts for you. This is a single file. It's 14 kilobytes minimized, and there is no TypeScript in htmx. So htmx at the core takes our 5 verbs and converts them into HTML attributes that we can use. So get, post, put, patch, delete. Those are the drivers of how we're going to interact with our server. htmx allows us to target elements to be updated by a server response. So you might notice here in our React example, we have a greeting component or a greeting line here that's going to be replaced by the content from our JSON response. And in htmx, it's really as simple as defining a location for it to replace, and then noting in your hx get. So this get will fire a request to the server. hx target will tell you, hey, this is the thing you need to replace with the response. So we can do that as well, and I can demonstrate that, maybe. So here we've got our wonderful htmx reading example, and we're going to load from the back end a greeting that simply loads, or it sends an HTML partial that we're then loading on the page. So we can do this pretty much all day. I've got at least 15 of these greetings ready to go at any time. So if we continue on, perhaps, what's the secret sauce here? This is some jQuery. This is the equivalent htmx. There's really not much to this. I want to hit you over the head with this point a bunch of times. There's not that much technical magic here with htmx. The important thing that you're considering when you reach for this as a library is about reframing your thinking about how the web works. So you're not talking about an expensive, client-managed JavaScript library. You're talking about a set of JavaScript rules that take HTML attributes and apply different requests or responses or handling of placement of new elements onto your DOM. Let's cover a couple more htmx features for fun. hx trigger, so this is satisfies our desire earlier to allow any event to trigger HTTP requests. So we can use buttons or divs, whatever we want, to send requests. So we can click to greet. We can have a div that triggers based on time, so every 1 second. We can do a button that we hover over and we can see we've run into one of the classic problems of web development here. We need to debounce this, otherwise it's going to send hundreds or thousands of requests. We can do that really quickly with a couple of small changes. So one of them is we can say intuitively, oh, mouse over exactly once. Or if we want to use a proper debounce or delay, we can delay by 1 second. So if we implement those and go back to our handy dandy browser, we get 1 second, or we can just hover once and not see it again. So one nice thing about htmx, reducing this JavaScript code to HTML attributes is it's solved what is an interview question for almost every developer. So we've done this in one HTML attribute that we've simply applied to our markup. Another fun example, hx swap. So you can define where in the DOM relative to other elements you're going to be placing items. So we've got an example for this. We can replace the whole button. We can replace the contents of the button. We can stick stuff at the start. We can stick stuff at the end. There are a bunch more of these options for you to play around with when you look at the docs, which I hope you will all do. And then one that I think is just kind of fun, you can implement a loading indicator for the response from your server. htmx handles that automatically. So we're going to wait a few seconds here and then get a response. So this is all stuff that you can do one-liners. This is usually like code that you have to implement or think about way more than that. So should I use htmx in my next project? As always, it depends. It's great right now in 2025 if you control your web stack. If you don't require complexity, if your state is highly deterministic, you know what you need to load, you have a limited number of items that you need to process, and your application adds most of its value on the server. So you have a big database of product pages, you have a bunch of blog posts, etc. Also great if you like big memes. The owners and the maintainers of htmx are really fond of being kind of insane online. They have a whole section of their site that is dedicated to their memes. I really need to foot stomp how crazy this is. There's just a lot of it. So you should not use htmx if you have a lot of non-deterministic or unclear user interaction. So you wouldn't want to do like spreadsheets in htmx. It would be a poor use of your time and money. Right now, it's not great if you have a lot of people who need to maintain your code this year. This is a real interaction I had with my backend developer / boss last year, where he told me I was out of my mind for suggesting using htmx in an application. So, you know, as always, our technology has social implications. Our industry is built by and of people with specific sets of experiences. And we have separation of concerns for a reason. And it's allowed us to make web code that performs in a very specific way. And so for better or for worse, you know, we are a product of that industry. And it's a little bit silly for us to walk in May of 2025 after 25 years of this model and say, we're just going to change it. So what if we could go back, in which I present a fun hypothetical? Let's do some time travel. Let's eat some bananas, save the peels, and then deploy them for the right people at the right time so they miss their presentations on the future of the web. So you might remember this is our timeline, and we're really going to call out the 2000 here. So Roy Fielding writes the REST dissertation, and then the same year we invent Ajax and completely ignore it. So we're going to start here, and we're just going to wipe the rest of that out. So we've altered the timeline. I guess, does anyone have like any thoughts on what the world might look like today if we didn't write any JS? This is a good group to ask this question to. Yeah, Nick.
I think it'd be Java applets everywhere.
Java applets everywhere.
I was thinking Flash.
I was going to say Flash too.
You're at Flash.
Flash was
Yeah.
Equally terrible.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyone else?
I mean, I hear Wicked's still out there.
You got Wicket?
Silverlight, was that the
That sounds like a term I've recognized.
That's Microsoft. That's Microsoft. Laser might be more prominent.
So a bunch of things. Everyone's really excited about those possibilities. It sounds really good. There are some upsides. In the hypermedia century, HTML becomes a true interface language and not just a thing people have to try and navigate and manage elsewhere. The back-end devs become the primary web builders. And front-end devs focus more on UX and accessibility. So things that I think lots of people agree that we're kind of lacking today. Dramatically smaller initial payloads. The web remains, highly semantic and navigable. We get SEO basically out of the box. And jQuery might still exist, but it would be mostly managing, small interactions and not entire web pages. Our golden butterfly here, we step on the wrong butterfly, and now we've really screwed things up. The big thing here is backend developers horrify us in new and exciting ways all the time by managing our front-end code and then sending it on our behalf. Yeah, you caught Flash, that was good. Microsoft probably would write an entire hypermedia OS. That would be crazy. Maybe we still stick with the blink tag because the semantic web reigns. So we have some advantages in the way we've actually done this, right? So we can run JavaScript offline. We have really good interactivity. Our separation of concerns is important because that means our backends can serve multiple front ends. We're not tied to one layout. We can have a service that deploys to native code on mobile and to web simultaneously. So there are a lot of upsides to the way things have actually turned out. And so I guess the point I wanted to make in saying that was, it's not bad that things turned out the way they did, and there are a lot of tools I think that try and address the weaknesses of the single page setup. There's a talk on Astro with islands. a lot more server-side rendering. So it's not all bad and it's not all dark. I think that it's fun to talk hypothetically about what if we did everything differently all the time. I did have a couple more things I implemented in this application that I didn't have time to put in the slides. So I just wanted to sort of like chat through the way that I set this up. So I decided to do this in Astro, partly because it makes the task of setting up our API really easy. So there's our JSON response, but as far as the greetings go, like you can see pretty visibly, it's just one HTML element and then some stuff that's happening on our server side. I implemented a one to throw in the time that, again, very simple. I set up this whole contacts app. So in the htmx or the Hypermedia Systems book, there is like you walk through an application. It's in Python in the book, but I kind of did parts of it in Astro here. So this contacts app, you can get like really good interactivity. This is a CRUD app. You've seen this a million times, but all this is htmx. So it's we're doing navigations that you can see. Like we'll navigate here to the view page, and that's a separate page. So this is very Web 1.0 stuff. But we get into the editing, and now this is all stuff that's happening, right here in the browser, and we're getting HTML back from the back end, maybe.
You go to time selected XHRs.
Oh, that's right. Well, okay, this one didn't work, so that's fine. I didn't finish edit properly, but oh, I did. I just couldn't see it in the. Doesn't really matter. But we can do a bunch of things like extended features, like throw up alerts automatically. That's also covered with a single HTMX attribute. So we can do highly interactive applications, and I wanted to do some CSS transitions in here for you, like you can handle the view transition API from HTMX. You have a lot of like flexibility and options, and if we go to htmx.org, just kidding, we're not going to. They have like a giant, like all their documentation is one giant page. It's searchable with your browser and not using something else. I mean, it's really, really cool. I think the HTMX is, I hope that I have expressed to you how cool I think it is, because exploring an alternate mental model of the web is worth doing, because I think we take a lot for granted when we're scripting a lot of responses. So next steps for you, you can try HTMX on your next personal project if you want to give it a shot. You can become an HTMX CEO if you go to htmx.ceo. I became a CEO actually just a couple of days ago, well after Nick posted that. So I'm on the list. But question the status quo. Do we need a framework for this? There are a lot of tools out there that are really interesting and flexible for your next web application that aren't just writing a lot of client-side JavaScript. But with that, I guess I'll open it up to some questions, keeping in mind that I'm just an enthusiast, not an expert. But if there aren't very many of those, I'll see you down at the hill. Yeah?
Isn't this just ripping off Intercooler?
It's the successor to Intercooler, I think, yeah. But yeah.
If you ever watch Tarsdale snipe with himself, hey, you ripped us off. And on Twitter, he's hilarious.
Yeah, I wish.
Under Bob Martin's skin last week.
There's like a whole series of, there's a post on their site that's just why HTMX sucks. So in which they address, a lot of their, like they're pretty open about when should you try and do a hypermedia application versus when is it practical to, consider just JS. But yeah.
Also, HTMX sucks mug as well.
Sorry, I didn't.
They sell HTMX sucks coffee mugs.
Yeah, and shirts, I think, too. Yeah.
Nice.
Yes.
Does adding all of these extra properties to your elements in the DOM cause accessibility issues?
A great question.
It was like HX get and
right.
HX replace, right? Like does that cause any issues with Yeah, for screen readers, for example.
Ostensibly, no, but I guess I have not used a screen reader myself, and I did not look up the answer to that question in advance. So,
Super easy to check, like in Firefox or Chrome or whatever.
do you want to do it now?
Run like an accessibility check with Lighthouse in Chrome. Firefox has an accessibility check.
Do I need to be able to access the internet? Because I haven't done that
If you
yet.
have a local level tab, just do it in that too. But I was curious if the extra properties on there cause issues.
Sorry, can I do that from here? I've never actually done this before. This is.
Wi-Fi password's on the whiteboard. I think you said
If you go to Lighthouse, right?
Lighthouse.
Okay.
I'm just saying, on this page.
Ignore any HTML attributes that are not.
That's what I was wondering.
Because I
is
think
are
they're
they-
only programmed to look at like ARIA tags and stuff, but everything else they probably should ignore, right?
I think for the spec, everything that's custom should prefix with data dash, but
It should, but Angular has all over that,
Okay.
so.
yeah. They save themselves with the HX dash.
Sure.
Like nothing's gonna, there's not gonna be a standard that's that.
Right, nobody's like looking for that.
Not performing.
Oh no.
You probably bump that up by adding.
Not my back. Oh no. Well, that's my fault. All these things appear to be my fault, so that's good. We like that.
Your next talk is about CSS apparently.
My next talk is going to be all about contrast, which I'm always hollering about at work and then forgetting about at home.
It doesn't seem like the HX issues.
No.
Or it causes any issues. So that's cool.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm just thinking out loud here.
Go ahead.
I'm not an expert in reading any of the papers, like that, I just kind of remember some of it, but I kind of remember the idea is that instead of the server like cobbling together everything for you, that they could just become like just simple resources. Here's images, here's videos, things like that. And then the browser would be the one that would handle it, so you're basically allowing everybody's browser to do the computations needed to create that user experience.
Right.
And then simplify the server side of that. These could also become like server side, like building blocks, so to speak, so you can have resources that all congregate together.
Yep.
So in that regard, if I'm thinking about it, like, okay, so if the idea is to simplify the resources, then maybe we're not even looking at a one place that provides all that HTMX. Because if it's just hypermedia and you have a resource
Right.
that says, here's what I can provide as forms for you, you can interact with it in these ways, then maybe that means that you can have a lot of more like dynamic interaction with all these resources saying, oh, well, I don't necessarily know how you're going to interact with this, but I know that I have a placeholder for that.
Right.
So now you may have multiple places where that form is coming from that you need to interact.
Yeah, a great point. I mean, we do this sort of intuitively with like microservices, right? We have the concept of requesting a bunch of different endpoints, and there's no reason that couldn't be extended to like a true hypermedia control where you've got an endpoint that's only responsible for managing state in a certain service. So you might have one service for your item on a product page, another service for your account settings or something like that. So yeah, a great point. And I did tie it to just like a single server client for my own sake, but an excellent point.
Seven real quick. What's up?
Could, maybe you said this and I missed it, but instead of, like for your greeting, instead of returning the greeting wrapped in a div, could you return a JSON object and then, could I have the templating part be in HTMX instead of like having pieces of my page out entrusted to backend developers?
I do think it sort of starts to break at that point because the assumption is you have things in your DOM that you're replacing. So HTMX's goal is to like take HTML elements and place them in the DOM. So
What's that?
It makes Go into PHP because you on the back end.
Yeah, I use HTMX with Go. It's actually really easy.
I wanted to make it run on Java for the bit, but I just didn't really have the patience for it.
Understandable.
Jessica.
Yeah, you had mentioned that I think you at one point said you get SEO for free or automatically, or can you explain that a little more?
Yeah, it's a little bit more semantic rather than having, I guess the alternative is like when you compare it to a single page app, because if you have servers returning content, like they're all just routes, they're all just links. So, if you have a roadmap of being able to hit links, you can return HTML partials and have them all indexed.
Okay,
Yeah, yes.
You did this in Astro, and Astro has their islands, and it seems like HTMX and Astro were like a match made in heaven.
Yeah, there's definitely, I don't know how I did this. Did I stop this by mistake? So whatever. Yes, I mean, you can definitely think of I thought of Astro just as like a great way to return bits of HTML. You can use it with anything that is a server, technically speaking. So you can do it, I suppose, in Next if you really wanted to. But
So long as you're returning HTML.
yeah, as long as what you're returning is DOM elements that can be rendered by a browser. Astro is a great choice for just a toy. That's because it gets me the IDE of being able to show you HTML partials, which I thought was really cool. Yeah.
How complex does it make the server side of things?
Sorry.
How complex does it make the backend and the server side of things?
Yeah, this was the problem I had when trying to do this in Java, is I had to construct a bunch of HTML in Java. I mean, it does make it more complicated. I'm sure if you were smarter at Java than I am, or you could get away with it in Django by making HTML elements on the fly. This is definitely a solved problem somewhere, or you could just.
This is really popular with the Django. I hear a lot of, if you've got say an MVC3 app, a Django app, an old Ruby app that you cannot rewrite the front end, there's no buy-in for it.
Right.
You can sprinkle on some HTMX and get them the same performance because you already have the templating language on the back end, and instead of sending up a JSON, you just send up a fragment of content.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh, there's more questions. Yeah, sorry, I've been leaving you hanging for a while. Yeah.
Thank you, yeah.
Sorry, I'm really nervous over here. It's
Front of the back of the room. I'm gonna start throwing tomatoes. No, we'll throw tomatoes in there. This is a new turn. Great talk, by the way, first of all. Second of all, is there some kind of event emission that happens when it actually does a replacement? Because I'm thinking from a jQuery standpoint, you're putting new elements in there, so how would one, if they wanted to use it in combination with some other kind of JavaScript, how do you get, I don't know, how you re-query the DOM essentially for these new elements that weren't there in the page loader or whatever?
The short answer is yes, there is. The long answer is if I could load it on if I wanted to put in the Wi-Fi password in front of all of you, I would show you. But yeah, there's a whole section on the HTMX org docs about the events they populate. There's certainly a long chapter about it in the book as well. They have an HTMX replacing event, and you can hook into it with JavaScript. Several examples in the book encourage you to use JavaScript for the extra interactivity. I mean, it's still a requirement. You can make an HTMX application, but some applications are better if you can do interactivity with JS too. Did you have a question?
Oh, it was more of a comment on how complicated does the backend become. I know on the Django side of things, you end up just writing a ton of views, so they're all just partial views. So it's I need to validate and make sure this is this email isn't already a user's email. You end up writing a validation view for it essentially.
A good point. I mean, in terms of it got a little confusing for me at times just strictly in Astro, because I was writing pages in Astro and then I was writing partials in Astro, and all of that I was just ostensibly you could just write that all in one page. So to trivialize it, yeah, you're adding a lot more partial complexity.
Are you familiar with Hotwire?
Not at all. I'm not even
Will
going to.
not ask you how they compare?
I won't pretend. Yeah, no. I saw the cool memes online. I was I'm going to talk about that one. Okay.
So from what I understand, because I was listening to a talk by, Caleb Sparuzzo or One did the live wire, so you've got like Phoenix Live View, you've got live wire, then you got like Ruby Hotwire. And apparently, a lot of it's inspired by HTMX.
Yeah, it seems very similar in philosophy.
I think the only difference they say is that with the Hotwire, you kind of get the back end there as part of it, whereas with HTMX, you're sort of, okay, what else do I need to put on the back end to make this work?
Sounds like it's Go. That's the one. Yeah.
.NET added a library for it.
Oh, okay.
So you can tell in your backend if the request is coming from HTMX or if it's just straight up thread request.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks.